There is a silence that descends before great shifts, a silence not made of absence, but of anticipation. In that stillness, something ancient stirs, a recognition that what has held authority for too long without balance is nearing its inevitable collapse. When I was shown the vision of power being removed, it was not thunder that spoke, but stillness. And in that stillness I understood. God does not speak to fright, He speaks to free. On the 5th of July 2025, a veil will fall, not just upon a man, but upon a structure that has become too proud, too blind, too disconnected from truth. It will not be an ordinary removal, not the shifting of one position for another. No, this will be a divine rebalancing, a forced turning of a page that too many were clinging to. The world has been living under the weight of illusions, masks worn so long that even the wearers began to believe in them. But God's timing is not concerned with appearances. He waits for the exact moment when the collapse of illusion serves the maximum awakening of the human soul. To be shown such a vision is not to be given power over the future. It is to be entrusted with the responsibility of awareness. The image of one being removed from their throne is not about vengeance or spectacle. It is the unfolding of cosmic justice, the kind that moves beyond courtrooms or public approval. It is what happens when the divine decides that a certain frequency can no longer survive in the light that is coming, a frequency of control, of deception, of self-worship disguised as leadership. And so, but make no mistake, the removal is only the outer layer. What God is truly showing is the truth behind the throne, the invisible architecture of manipulation, the networks of fear, the system that sustained one man's rise and permitted many others to remain silent. Power, in the worldly sense, does not exist in isolation. It is fed by belief, protected by fear, and maintained by the absence of truth. When that is stripped away, what remains is not simply the fall of a person. It is the unveiling of all that we refuse to question. So many will be shocked. They will say, how could this happen? But the real question is, how did it last this long? Because we allowed it. We traded truth for comfort. We sacrificed inner clarity for the illusion of safety. We idolized those who looked strong instead of those who were aligned. And when the fall comes, many will grieve, not the man, but the loss of the idea they attached to him. This is why the fall is not just external. It is a mirror held up to every soul. It is an invitation to ask, what within me supported this illusion? The unconscious within each of us is what fuels the unconscious in the world. And the removal of one from power only matters if it awakens us to remove falsehood from our own lives. God does not expose to punish, He exposes to awaken. He reveals so that healing can finally begin. But healing does not begin with celebration. It begins with humility. Those who cheer at the fall are still bound by ego. True awakening sees beyond the surface. It grieves for the collective deception. It feels the cost of every year spent under illusion. It recognizes that while a man may be removed from a seat, the deeper seat within the minds and hearts of millions must still be vacated. And that work cannot be done in the headlines. It must be done in stillness, in reflection, in the silence where the soul speaks. The world is preparing for a shift that many are not ready to see. But readiness is not comfort. Readiness is willingness. Willingness to see the truth, even when it burns. Willingness to release what we once defended. Willingness to admit, I was wrong. That is how new power is born, not in speeches, not in victories, but in the quiet moments when the ego finally surrenders to truth. The one who is removed will not fall alone. Every structure built on the same frequency will tremble. You will feel it, not just in the news, but in your body, in your relationships, in your perception of reality. Because the collapse of one external power activates 1,000 internal shifts. The illusions you depended on will feel unstable. The patterns you repeated without thought will suddenly feel unbearable. The truths you avoided will echo louder than ever. And in this moment you must choose. Will you cling to the old or surrender to the new? Because God's vision is not a prophecy of destruction, it is a doorway to realignment. But that doorway is narrow. You cannot walk through it carrying pride. You cannot walk through it blaming others. You cannot walk through it distracted by noise. You must be empty. Empty enough to hear the guidance that comes without words. Empty enough to receive the light that reveals what must still be dissolved. The one being removed is not the beginning of the story, it is the middle. What matters now is what follows. When the world is shocked, will you be still? When others seek revenge, will you seek understanding? When confusion rises, will you remain rooted? Because in the aftermath of collapse, true leadership emerges. Not the leadership that controls, but the leadership that clarifies. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that radiates calm. You are being prepared for this. Not to take a throne, but to hold a space. Not to command, but to guide. Not to dominate, but to align. Many people believe that the removal of power is the end. But God's wisdom is more intricate. What is removed outwardly must now be cultivated inwardly. You are not being asked to watch history. You are being asked to transcend it. And you cannot transcend what you still cling to. Release your loyalty to illusions. Release your identification with false strength. Release your attachment to personalities and begin to anchor in principles. This is the invitation of the moment. You were not shown this message to panic. You were shown it to prepare. Not externally, but internally. Because the real earthquake does not happen in the world, it happens in the soul. It shakes the foundation of your beliefs. It fractures the walls of your limitations. It cracks open the parts of you that settled for shallow truths. And in that breaking, something deeper is born. A knowing, a seeing, a state of presence so quiet that it does not need proof. It just knows. On July 5th, the world will witness a shift. But those who are awake will understand that the shift is not about one man. It is about all of us. It is about the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. One written not by force, but by awareness. Not by the few, but by the awakened many. And the first step is to remember. When power is removed, it is not a punishment. It is a purging. It is the cleansing of what no longer serves. It is the dissolving of what no longer resonates, and in its place, truth stands quietly, waiting to be seen. Truth does not shout. It does not demand. It waits. It watches. It remains constant while the illusions rise and fall. And when the noise fades, it is still there, unshaken. That is the kind of truth we are being called to embody. The kind that does not rise and fall with public opinion. The kind that does not require external validation. The kind that radiates from inner stillness. So ask yourself now, before the date arrives, what power within me must be removed? What illusion must I let go of? What false role must I step down from? Because the shift is not only about the one, it is about everyone. Each of us carries a small throne inside, one that the ego sits upon, making decisions rooted in fear, image, and control. But now, that throne must be vacated. The soul must return to its rightful place as guide. And that transition, though subtle, is the greatest revolution of all. You were born for this moment, not to fear it, but to meet it with clarity. Not to hide, but to rise. Not to react, but to reflect. And then, to walk forward. Not as a follower of the fallen, but as a beacon of what rises next. For when power is removed and truth is revealed, the soul has one responsibility: to live in alignment with what it now sees. And that is where the true journey begins. Prepare your inner kingdom before the outer one falls. These words are not a metaphor, they are a map, a sacred reminder that the deepest shifts in our lives are not born from what happens in the world, but from what we have nurtured, neglected, or ignored within ourselves. The vision that was given, the removal of one from power, was not given as entertainment nor prophecy to stir the curious. It was given as instruction, as preparation, as a call to return to the one place that cannot be shaken by events, no matter how global, no matter how shocking, the stillness within. This is not about politics. This is not about nations. This is about vibration. A frequency shift, a dismantling of illusions. And every illusion that collapses out there, if you are awake, reflects one that must also be surrendered inside you. Too many spend their lives staring out the window, reacting to the weather, unaware that their soul remains a storm. What is the use of predicting the sky if you cannot still the thunder in your own mind? The fall that is coming, the fall that has already begun, is only visible to those whose eyes are not fixed outwardly. It will be felt by those who are prepared, not with strategies, but with silence. You do not need to flee cities. You do not need to hoard supplies. You need to return to the place in you that the world cannot touch. The inner temple, the sanctuary of presence. In that space, there is no panic. There is no confusion. There is only clarity, and clarity is power. When a man falls, when a structure collapses, the collective spirit looks for something to lean on. That is why fear spreads so quickly, because most have not built the inner scaffolding required to withstand the collapse of outer dependency. They were not trained to seek stability inside. They were taught to look for saviors, for leaders, for symbols of control. But God does not elevate those symbols to replace himself. He allows them only until the soul is ready to awaken. And when he removes them, it is not a punishment. It is an invitation. To lead yourself, to govern your own energy, to rise, not in dominance, but in discipline. This is what preparing the inner kingdom means. It means learning how to sit with discomfort and not escape. It means training the mind to return to breath when chaos screams. It means releasing your identity as someone who needs external order to feel safe. Safety does not come from governments. It does not come from systems. It comes from alignment. And alignment is cultivated, like a muscle, like a garden. You tend to it every day, not just when the storm arrives. You breathe into it. You listen to the quiet voice that has been whispering under your thoughts all along. That voice is not loud, but it is wise. And when everything falls, that voice will remain. To prepare your inner kingdom is to remove the false kings that you have allowed to sit on the throne of your mind. The king of fear, the king of doubt, the king of comparison, the king of needing approval. These voices have ruled you longer than any man in power, and now is the time to dethrone them. With gentleness, but with firmness. With patience, but with determination. You see, the real battle is not the one the world will show you on the news. The real battle is between the part of you that wants to stay asleep and the part of you that is waking up. An awakening is not a moment. It is a movement, a practice, a path. The world may appear to be shaking, but the real quake begins within. If you do not know how to center your spirit, the fall of another will become your own. Not because it was meant to be, but because you never learned how to separate truth from noise. And the truth is this: your peace was never meant to be borrowed. Your stability was never meant to depend on others. Your purpose was never supposed to be postponed until the world was calm. It was meant to be lived now, even in uncertainty, especially in uncertainty. There is a great paradox hidden in preparation. It is not the kind that runs and hides. It is the kind that becomes more visible, more available, more compassionate, more anchored. When the external world is falling, the prepared soul becomes a pillar, not of power as the world defines it, but of presence. A walking reminder that there is a different way to respond, a higher way, a quieter way. And it is that energy, calm, non-reactive, rooted, that becomes more powerful than any speech, any warning, any broadcast. That energy heals the environment around it. It softens fear. It invites stillness. It breaks the spell of panic. But such energy is not spontaneous. It is cultivated, like fire. It must be tended in advance. When the match is lit, you do not begin searching for wood. You must already have gathered it. When the winds come, you do not begin to build your shelter. You must have built it, nail by nail, moment by moment, in the hours when no one was watching. That is how you prepare your inner kingdom. Quietly, without applause, with the discipline of daily return. Returning to your breath, returning to your values, returning to the silence that connects you to the divine. On July 5, many eyes will open in shock, but the eyes that have been opened will not be shaken. They will understand. Not everything that collapses is a tragedy. Sometimes the collapse is mercy. Sometimes the fall is the only way for truth to rise. And those who are grounded will not resist it. They will not rush to replace the fallen king. They will instead look inward and ask, what inside me has changed? What illusions have I shed? What new responsibility am I now called to hold? Because responsibility is the real test. You see, when we are no longer distracted by false leaders, false idols, false promises, we are left with only ourselves. And in that moment, many will realize they do not know who they are. They were built around reaction, around external chaos, around dependency. And when those distractions are removed, they will feel emptiness. But that emptiness is not a curse. It is the starting point, the soil for new awareness, the birth of real inner presence. And presence is what this world has been starving for. Do not wait until the world collapses to seek stability. Begin now, prepare now, not in fear but in love. Love for yourself, your clarity, your alignment. Love for the future you who will thank you for the calm you are cultivating today. Meditation is not just practice, it is construction. Each moment you sit in stillness, you are laying the bricks of your inner fortress. Not to isolate yourself, but to create a space where clarity lives. A space you can return to when the outer voices scream. The power being removed is symbolic, a symbol of what is no longer sustainable, what is no longer aligned with where the world must go. But the real story is the transformation that it will trigger in the collective spirit. Some will resist, some will descend into blame and confusion, but others, those who prepared, will rise. They will not rise in dominance, they will rise in serenity. They will become the new compass for those lost in chaos, not because they want to be seen, but because they cannot help but shine. To prepare your inner kingdom is not selfish. It is the most sacred gift you can offer to the world. Because when the outer kingdom begins to fall, those without roots will reach out. And if your roots run deep, you can be the tree, the anchor, the reminder that what is real cannot be taken. That peace is possible, even here, even now. This is not about being perfect, it is about being present. Present enough to notice your reactions, present enough to choose alignment over panic, present enough to stop seeking saviors and start embodying your own soul's guidance. There is a quiet wisdom that lives in each of us, but we only hear it when we are willing to turn away from the noise. That willingness is your preparation, that decision is your power, and that presence is what will carry you through any storm. The outer kingdom may fall, but the inner kingdom, if built in truth, will remain unshaken. And from that place, a new world will begin, not through force, not through fear, but through the quiet courage of those who dared to prepare before the signs became obvious. The shift has already begun. Do not wait for the headlines. Begin now, in breath, in silence, in the simple, sacred act of returning home to yourself. There are moments in time when the fall of one is not simply the end of a rain, but the beginning of a ripple. a ripple that flows through minds, through hearts, through the unseen corners of human awareness. A single event, a collapse, a removal, a dethroning, can shatter the illusion of permanence and remind the soul that power is not eternal unless it is aligned with truth. When God showed me the vision of a man being removed from power on July 5, 2025, I did not see merely a political shift. I saw the cracking open of a collective trance. I saw the hypnotized awaken. I saw eyes, long kept shut by comfort, by fear, by tradition, begin to open not because they were told, but because they could no longer ignore what was happening inside. The fall of one because the alarm clock for millions, not because they cared for him and not because they hated him, but because in his fall something they believed about the world began to crumble. A story that held their worldview together started to dissolve. That story might be about power, about security, about leadership, or even about God. And when stories dissolve, identity is shaken. But it is through that shaking that the soul has a chance to stand. For too long, people have been taught that awakening is soft, gentle, romantic. But awakening, when it is real, begins with a shattering. It begins with a collapse. Something false must die before something real can live. The one who falls may appear to fall alone, but he falls with the weight of countless unconscious agreements that allowed deception to live, that permitted truth to be ignored, that rewarded performance over alignment. When that structure falls, it is not just one life. It is a symbol of all we tolerated, all we excused, all we avoided. That is why the fall stirs so many reactions. It is not about the man, it is about what we see of ourselves in him. And when the outer mirror breaks, the inner denial breaks with it. People begin to feel what they refuse to feel. They begin to ask what they never dared to ask. They begin to remember what they had forgotten in the rush of routine. The awakening that follows is not loud. It is not on the news. It is not on stages. It happens in bedrooms, in hearts, in quiet conversations between the soul and the self. A person looks into the mirror and says, "What else have I blindly followed?" They ask, "Who else have I given power to that never earned it?" They whisper, "What if I was wrong?" These are the sacred questions. These are the tremors of real awakening. Not the questions that seek to blame, but the questions that seek to see. Because to awaken is to see through the veil that once comforted and controlled. Many will not understand. They will think the event was just a scandal, just a political shift. But those who are attuned know this is spiritual. This is energy rising. This is light entering where darkness hid for too long. This is God removing what blocks the collective from ascending. And when something is removed by divine will, it is not only because it was harmful, it is because the people have reached a threshold, a point of spiritual readiness, a point where they can no longer evolve under illusion. And so illusion is taken away, even if it hurts. This is how grace often looks. It does not come wrapped in comfort, it comes wrapped in disruption. Because only in disruption does the soul become fully alert. That alertness is awakening, that trembling in the gut, that unease in the chest, that cracking in the mind. It is the birth of a new way of seeing. The fall of one opens the inner eyes of many, and what they see they cannot unsee. They see how they gave away their power. They see how they confuse charisma with truth. They see how silence was never safety, it was complicity. And now there is no going back. This is why God allows these moments, not to punish, but to pivot, not to destroy, but to expose. And through that exposure, humanity is offered a window, a narrow, brief opening into a higher awareness. But that window does not stay open forever. It requires courage to step through it, courage to admit you were asleep, courage to let go of the stories that defined you, courage to begin again, but this time from presence, this time from within. The awakening of many is not always dramatic. Some will feel it as a whisper, a strange stillness that follows the noise. Others will feel it as a fire, a rage against everything false. Some will walk away from long-held beliefs. Others will suddenly remember their purpose, their soul's mission, as if something ancient was reawakened. You see, the fall was never just about power being removed. It was about space being made, space for something truer to rise. But only those who are present can receive it. The world will say, "Who will lead us now?" But the awakened do not ask this question, because they know the era of blind leadership is ending. The era of dependency is closing. This is the era of sovereign alignment, where every soul becomes responsible for its own truth, where guidance is no longer outsourced, where God is no longer found in institutions, but in silence, in breath, in awareness. There is something deeply humbling about watching the mighty fall. It reminds us that all things built without truth will eventually crumble. It reminds us that nothing hidden stays hidden forever. It reminds us that energy does not lie, even when words do. And so the awakening begins not with noise, but with honesty. Brutal, liberating honesty. I ignored the signs. I clung to the lie. I believed in the image, not the energy. These confessions are not shameful, they are sacred. They are the first steps out of the trance. Do not fear the fall. Fear the refusal to awaken after it. Fear the urge to replace one illusion with another. Fear the temptation to fill the silence with noise. Because in that silence, something sacred is waiting. The soul does not scream, it waits. And when the old collapses, the soul quietly whispers, "Now, are you ready to hear me?" The ones who awaken now will not look like the leaders of before. They will not crave applause. They will not chase followers. They will radiate alignment. Their power will not come from titles or platforms. It will come from inner coherence, from living in integrity when no one is watching, from choosing stillness over strategy. These are the new pillars, the ones who rise, not above, but within. You see, the awakening of many is not about rebellion, it is about remembrance. A remembrance of who we are when the masks fall. A remembrance of the values we traded for convenience. A remembrance of the path we walked before the world told us to chase shadows. And when many remember together, something shifts in the collective field. The air becomes different. The energy becomes lighter. The choices become clearer. That is what God showed me. Not just the fall, but the awakening. The breath that returns when control is lifted. The clarity that descends when illusion is removed. The sacred chaos that births new order. Not imposed from above, but emerging from within. This is why the timing is divine, because the world is ripe, not for more systems, but for more soul. Not for louder leaders, but for quieter wisdom. Wisdom is rising. Like a tide, like a hum beneath the noise. Each person who awakens becomes a tuning fork. Their presence vibrates. It touches others, not with effort, but with frequency. And soon, one becomes two, two become four, four become 100. This is how awakening spreads. Not through force, through frequency, through resonance, through remembrance. The fall of one reveals the awakening of many, because it interrupts the pattern, it breaks the loop. It shocks the system just enough to create a crack, and in that crack, light enters. And those who have waited for that light, even without knowing it, begin to stir. They begin to feel the call they had buried. They begin to walk a different path, not louder, but truer. You will know these souls. They will not need to speak loudly. Their eyes will tell you everything. Their presence will remind you of your own. They will not seek to convince. They will seek to become. And in becoming, they become the evidence that God is still moving, that spirit is still working, that awakening is not a myth, but a movement. This is the moment. not of endings but of emergence, not of fear but of frequency. And if you are reading this now, you are part of it. Not a bystander, not a spectator, but a participant in the sacred return. Return to truth, return to stillness, return to the soul. Let the fall open you. Let the awakening reach you. Let the silence speak to you. You do not need to shout your awakening. Live it. Embody it. And in doing so, you become the evidence of what's possible after the fall. It is not the fall that defines the future, but what we choose to build in its silence. When power is stripped from the hands of one who held it tightly, the world often rushes to fill the space with noise, opinion, speculation, and fear. But the divine does not operate on noise. The divine speaks most clearly when everything else has gone quiet. And so it is in the stillness after the storm, when the dust has not yet settled and the echoes of control are still dissolving in the air, that the future is born. Not from systems, not from strategies, but from the consciousness of those who remain. This is why the true work begins after the fall, not before. Because once the illusion is gone, we are finally faced with the real question: what now must we become? There is a temptation always to react, to scramble, to reassemble the pieces into a new shape that feels familiar. The ego hates emptiness. It hates the unknown. And so it will offer many paths, quick fixes, new authorities, more distractions, to avoid sitting in the void left behind when a leader is removed. But the wise do not rush to rebuild. The wise wait. The wise listen. Because what comes next must not be a reaction. It must be a response from truth. That response does not come from intellect. It comes from stillness. It comes from alignment. It comes from remembering that true power does not arrive with force. It arrives through clarity. And clarity can only speak when we are silent enough to hear it. This is the invitation God offers every time something falls away. Do not just replace it, transcend it. Become something new.